Hi, I'm Mary Pohl, your host for the Sales Mastery Summit. Do you know how to build trust even in the most difficult situations? Say when you are just not working things out with a customer relationship. Today's experts have a tool chest full of practical ways that you can build trust throughout the sales cycle and in everyday relationships. With me today are Charlie Green and Andrea Howe, authors of the Trusted Advisor Fieldbook. Welcome, Charlie and Andrea.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary.
So great to have you. And I'm very excited because trust is a very abstract concept. So the fact that you've got very tactical and practical tools to help really build someone's trust building acumen is very useful to us all. So I understand that you've got scripts and worksheets and checklists that really help someone change their actions, not just their mindset around building trustworthiness. So to start out, can you help us understand what are some of the actions someone would take to build their own trustworthiness?
Yeah, I can help with that, and Charlie, chime in with anything critical that you think
Sure.
that I miss. One of the things that we feature in the Trusted Advisor Fieldbook that it was actually created and first shared in the book, The Trusted Advisor, that Charlie co-authored, a little over a decade ago, right now, Charlie?
That's right.
Is the trust equation, which the primary purpose of the trust equation is to make what is abstract concrete. And it looks at trustworthiness across four dimensions, four variables, if you will. And those dimensions are credibility, reliability, intimacy, and those three appear in the numerator of a formula. And in the denominator, the fourth variable is self-orientation. So the goal is to increase everything in the numerator, your credibility, reliability, and intimacy levels, and to decrease or keep at a minimum your self-orientation. And there are, in fact, specific actions that you can take in each of those variables.
Mm-hmm.
I can give you some examples if you'd like.
Go ahead. You're on a roll.
Yeah, okay, I'll keep rolling. So a couple examples for credibility. I mean, what we all intuitively understand about credibility is to really know your stuff. I mean, that's really a key part of it, is your credentials and your qualifications. So do your homework, be prepared, know your subject matter expertise. One of the most under-leveraged aspects of credibility, that being said, is truthfulness or honesty. So a key action that you can take to build your credibility is to actually be willing to say the tough stuff, to name the difficult conversations, to maybe have a point of view that's a little bit contrarian or provocative. A couple of examples for reliability, which is actually of the four, probably the most mundane of the variables, is to, have your actions and your words line up as consistently as possible. And when you make a promise that you're not going to be able to deliver on, do what most people actually don't, which is to get in communication immediately. A couple tips for intimacy. I think of intimacy as having three basic dimensions. The one we, again, intuitively understand is discretion. Probably next in line, we understand pretty well, but don't necessarily do as well as we could, which is empathy. Being easy to relate to and relating easily with other people. And a key action to take around empathy is to practice really, really great empathetic listening. And then the third aspect of intimacy is risk-taking. And that kind of ties to some of the things I said before, but, being willing to ask things that others might not, or say things that others might not be willing to. And then the self-orientation, a couple key actions to keep that low as possible. One is to be, to really come from a perspective of curiosity, to really, really be interested in other people, and to make sure that you're focused on their agenda, not yours.
Okay. I love that. One thing that popped into my mind living in the Midwest is I think we are schooled at an early age to be conflict avoiders. So
Right.
when you mention, address the tough stuff immediately, how do you get somebody over that fear factor that it's okay to address the tough stuff?
As a fellow Midwesterner, let me, underscore what you said. You're absolutely right. We're taught that nice people don't seek out conflict. You don't make other people feel uncomfortable. You don't contradict them. You don't, you take care of business quietly behind closed doors. And if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all, etc.
Exactly.
And, unfortunately, as all of us from the Midwest also know, that is a recipe for just stuffing stuff down and postponing it and not dealing with tough issues and so forth. So the real question is not whether that's right or wrong. It's wrong. The question is, how do you correct it? How do you do it rightly? How can you, in a socially acceptable manner, raise the difficult issues that we all sort of wish we could sweep under the table? And the answer lies in these steps, in particular the last two that Andrea mentioned, the intimacy and the low self-orientation. And there's a very particular tool we developed called Name It and Claim It, which is a grammatical construct for actually calling out the difficult issues in the room and speaking to them. We can get into that later, but it's actually, you can kind of condense it to a grammatical formula if you're careful about it. That lets you then raise discussions, and if you're the one who takes the risk of raising it, a funny thing happens. Like a minor example would be if you say, look, I'm probably the only one in the room who doesn't get this, but would somebody mind helping me out? The stupid question, what is XYZ? Well, you know what? You're not the only one in the room that didn't get what XYZ was, and everybody else knows it, and they appreciate that you were the one that raised it. So they may kid around, but you'll get your question answered, and everybody will appreciate that you were the one to break the ice. So I think of it as a socially acceptable way of getting to the difficult issues that people don't talk about.
Love it. Okay. Are there changes in the current selling environment that you feel impact the need for trust building or make it a greater hurdle to overcome these days?
Andrea?
I was just going to say, that's a great one for you, Charlie.
I'm happy to. Sure.
Why
I
don't
think
you start, and I'll add if I see anything you
good,
need.
good. Yeah, there are some changes. One of them there is, and this is not news to anybody, but it's empirically true, there is massive wide-based cynicism and lower levels of trust today, compared to 10 years ago. And this is not a forum to go into all the reasons why. It's simply true. Our level of trust in all kinds of institutions is down. Our level of trust in salespeople, et cetera, all that stuff is down, down, down. And that sounds like bad news. I mean, the truth is, it's actually great news for anybody that really understands how to develop a trusted relationship with a customer. It means everybody else is dropping, and if you can figure out how to behave in a decent manner, you got a tremendous competitive advantage here. So, at a time when trust is declining, that's good news for those who know how to be trustworthy.
And so why do you think others are dropping right now?
Well, I think, on average, everybody's average. Uh, we've become less trusting of entities, business entities on Wall Street. We've suffered through a few decades of ideologies that talk about competition and winning and sustainable competitive advantage. And too many people and too many institutions have gotten short-term oriented, self-oriented, selfish, too economically oriented. And we've been taught lots of things in education in general and business schools that the only real stuff is things you can measure. The only real approach to changing things in sales is purely behavior. Honestly, none of that stuff is true, and we all know it's not true. Attitudes matter. Intentions matter. Beliefs matter. The things that drive your behaviors are the things that you mostly believe. And all of us recognize that in another human being. We know when somebody's flim-flamming you. We know when somebody's slinging it and trying to get by on us. We just know in our bones. Human beings are very highly wired, highly evolved. We have BS meters, if you will, and we know. So what we need to do is rethink and get back to a fundamental basis of trust and trust-based selling, which is very simply this. If you help other people out, they will help you out. If you listen to other people, they will listen to you. If you do long-term oriented things for other people, they will do long-term oriented things for you. Human beings are just wired in a kind of reciprocal way. And the reverse has been true too. If we behave in a short-term manner, we're going to get short-term behavior back. If we behave suspiciously, people will suspect us, and so forth down the line. So, we've gone down that path for a whole variety of social reasons, but we don't have to. Anybody listening to this webcast knows if you behave decently towards other human beings, it comes back to you. So it's up to us to begin to change the cycle. And that may sound like, woo-woo Buddhist Beatles song Happy Talk, but it's also a very sound economic model. You look back at the very successful companies and you find a lot of that.
Well, that ties perfectly into the trust equation that Andrea shared with us, that essentially under pressure, people have a natural tendency to become more self-oriented, which is going against them. And the environment is creating a greater hurdle for establishing credibility because the given trust factor is so low to start out with. So it's a double whammy there.
Yeah.
So Andrea, did you want to add any comments to that?
No, I thought it was perfectly articulated, Charlie. Thank you for that.
Okay. So with the advent of social media, and if you're 15, that is how you build trust, apparently, with your friend, your closest, your BFFs. When it comes to business, what would you say, how is social media helping or hindering the trust building process?
As much as I want to lob that back to you, Charlie, I'm going to take it and then have you add, because I have such a love-hate relationship with social media personally. But, I think it's probably safe to say that it puts all of our trust building or trust breaking behaviors really under, it shines a spotlight on them in a whole new way, because we have this ability to connect or not with, thousands and tens of thousands of people, whereas before, maybe our sphere of influence was, in the hundreds. And I think how we conduct ourselves online and how we do or don't apply all the basics of building trust is just as relevant, if not more so. For example, are we out there tweeting about ourselves, or are we tweeting about other people? Are we trying to share knowledge and be a catalyst for promoting others, or are we primarily using it as a mechanism to promote ourselves? Are we making connections? Are we really zeroing in on building intimacy, which I think is possible? Do you acknowledge people for tweeting you and retweeting you and so forth? Or are we just kind of, doing a spray and pray approach? So I think it's very relevant and can have a huge ripple effect.
Okay, your points that you brought up are perfect in terms of, I'm sure what you'll get into in terms of face-to-face actions that someone could take, but online, are you being of service or are you serving yourself? Especially is an echo online with a much larger audience of your trust building acumen.
Yeah. Let me just add a little bit to that. It's the social media allow us to amplify both the best and the worst of our behaviors. And if we are behaving, if our sales efforts are essentially selfishly oriented and promotional in nature and self-serving and short-term focused, that's the instinct. Oh, let's put a web page out about us. Let's tweet about us. Let's use Facebook to advertise us. And by contrast, you see some very intelligent, evolved approaches in social media. I think of the inbound marketing and content-based marketing as two very significant movements who recognize this is a chance to actually give to our customers and clients, and resting comfortably in the notion that human beings will respond in kind. Again, we're back to that people return tit for tat. If you give people useful material focused on them and dial back the selfishness meter and give it a longer time to take care, amazing things happen. I think it's kind of exciting.
Definitely. So you really can help clients from the scenario of meeting a stranger, which we've talked about. It's tougher to establish a trust-based relationship with a new prospect or stranger nowadays because their trust meter starts out lower, and just the pressure of the business environment may create more self-orientation. So can you help us with some scenarios of building trust at the beginning of a relationship, and then maybe migrate through a scenario of dealing with an inevitable conflict that happens in all long-term relationships, and how you really do navigate that in a trustworthiness way?
Sure. Andrea, why don't I take some of the opening and you take the conflict?
Sure.
It's if you do nothing other than say, here I am, yes, it is more difficult these days, but it's not that hard actually to lower boundaries and create a trust-based relationship with people right off the bat, if you go back to some basic principles. One of the things that Andrea mentioned in the trust equation around intimacy is ability to know, to take a risk, to share who we are, to be transparent. And you'll notice that the big success stories out there online, almost all focus on a lot of transparency. They are not hiding anything. The companies that get in trouble, the organizations that get in trouble, are those who are trying to hide. One of the fastest ways to make a new relationship is to let everybody know as much as you can about who you are. Show them your picture. On your website, get a photo up there, stick some video up on your site. Make sure that people know immediately they've got full access to all your product line, your service offerings, whatever it is that you're doing. Don't focus so much on making it polished and sharp. Show everybody what you got, warts and all. We respond very favorably to being told, this is who I am. And you know, I'm not perfect, and I'm the first to admit it, but here's who I am. That is something that we immediately trust. We don't trust people who we think are trying to fake it. So across all the boards, I think transparency is the one single word to keep in mind as a touchstone for how to get to know people. That, and sorry, I'll add one more word that Andrea mentioned before, curiosity. If you can immediately drive the conversation away from, you know, here's me and my resume and what I do and how great we are, towards something genuinely curious. Who are you? What do you do? Where are you from? What's your background? What are your issues? You know, focus the conversation on the others immediately. That relaxes them. That increases the level of trust.
Perfect. And Andrea, can we toss the baton to you then? And Charlie gave us great advice to initiate the relationship, and then eventually we're going to disagree on something or have some inherent conflict, perhaps even company drop the ball, and I get to take the lumps for that. How does somebody deal with that and maintain the level of trust?
Yeah, so, and if you don't mind, I'd love to just add two quick things to what Charlie said, building on that, and to what you said, Mary. You raised a great point that in today's environment, it may seem like it's all the more challenging to build trust in a new relationship. And I think paradoxically, it means it's all the easier for us to differentiate ourselves if we're willing to do the things that Charlie articulated. So in a way, the environment really is right for establishing yourself as a trustworthy person. And I think a critical way for salespeople to do that, Charlie talked about, you know, here's who I am, warts and all. How about as well, here's who I'm not. And here's who we're not as an organization. And by the way, if you need X, Y, or Z, we're not your people. Let us refer you to so-and-so and thus and such. And, you know, really becoming and establishing yourself as an honest broker, I think, you know, in a first interaction is a phenomenal way to build your trustworthiness. Now, as you mentioned, Mary, I mean, at some point, you know, it's not a new relationship anymore. And like all relationships, professional and personal, there are difficulties. And in fact, you know, I think it can be said that you don't really have true, authentic trust in a relationship until you've weathered some of those storms together. And it really is those opportunities that are critical for letting somebody know who you really are and what you're about. Because as long as things are going smoothly, you don't really have a chance to show that. And I think one thing that's really critical is an insistence, in spite of the discomfort, whether you're from the Midwest or you're simply from, you know, the East Coast or another part of the world, and it's just plain humanly uncomfortable to deal with stuff, but an insistence and a willingness to just always be willing to put the relationship on the table, not just the project plan or the task or as a statement of work or whatever it is, but to step back and say, you know what, Houston, I think we have a problem. At the risk of creating some awkwardness here, or, you know, I'd really like to work through XYZ issue. Just a willingness to do that from a place of caring and with lots of, you know, caveats, you know, gosh, at the risk of creating an awkward situation, or I think it goes so far in terms of building a relationship and making it safe and comfortable for the people on the other side of the situation, you know, just kind of be willing to open up and you know, just have a real conversation. And I think our willingness, leading with trust, to take responsibility for whatever there is to be responsible for if something has gone awry, and we always have at least like a little piece of responsibility somewhere, and a willingness to lead with that and say, you know, here's how I messed up, or here's how we messed up, or gosh, if I had a do-over, this is what I wish had happened. Without an expectation necessarily of that coming back. But again, paradoxically, when we're willing to do that, 9 times out of 10, if not more often than that, that's exactly what comes back. You know, the people on the other side of the issue are saying, well, you know what, truth be told, if we had to do it all over again, we should have done X, Y, and Z. And then not only do you just completely open the floodgates of communication, but you've learned so much and grown, you know, as a team, as an organization, as people working together.
I can see how that would build such tremendous loyalty that actually blacks out competition, because if someone has achieved that level of trust with you, starting over with somebody new, you know, why would you do that if you've already reached that level with who you're already working with?
Right.
So can you actually use these principles if you're not face to face? So many people work in virtual team environments, maybe over Skype, And,
Right.
you know, if they're lucky, they have video Skype, but mainly it's an email and teleconference relationship. How do the
Right.
principles need to be adapted, if at all?
Well, first of all, the principles are identical. They do stay the same. You know, you're open, you're transparent, you call out issues that are real, you focus on the long term. When you reduce the bandwidth available to us, you know, meaning when we've got less visual, all these lowered things, you need to really amp up the few degrees of freedom that we still have. You need to be careful in your language. You need to add a few more words than you might otherwise. If you can throw in pictures and photos, great. Anchor your conversations to prior conversations. Make sure that the proportion of language about yourself is reduced to a small portion of the total. And the principles end up working because we all know what email's like. We know it's low bandwidth, low emotional connectivity, so we make corrections for that. And again, if your email communications are more other-oriented, less self-oriented, more transparent, then you get a lot of credit for that. Same principles, though.
I would think there's a danger in them becoming very task-oriented and removing some of the humanness out of the relationship.
Well, that's right. But again, as Andrea pointed out, the bar is lowered. Most email does lend itself very well to transactional behavior. So, not that you should always, you know, move away from that, but on those occasions when you do, you will differentiate yourself from those who don't. We've all seen emails that are just brief to the point, and others that with a few key a few key phrases, easy for me to say, you know, connect with the humanity. Just, you know, focus, make an observation about the other party or some acknowledgement of something that's real. It can be done.
Okay. Andrea, did you want to add?
Yeah, just building on that, I think the thing that you lose when you're virtual is the familiarity that kind of naturally occurs when you have, you know, water cooler talk, or you just happen to run into somebody in the cafeteria. And it's not the same. It's never going to be exactly the same. But I think if you're intentional and focused about doing what you can to recreate some of that, and not always be so uber task driven and task focused. You know, when you start a conference call on a, you know, regular Monday morning conference call that's a team meeting, you know, allow a few minutes at the beginning of the conversation to have people talking about, you know, what did they do on the weekend that's, you know, that's interesting to share. Things like that may seem silly and may seem, you know, under the pressure of deadlines like time wasters. And you think about the time that's saved because that sense of comfort and familiarity gets created when those problems occur, and they inevitably do. You know, if I got to work out an issue with somebody who I know, you know, also has a, you know, a penchant for mosaic art or whatever, you know, we've got some kind of commonality outside of the task that we're working on. It's just, you know, it's like it greases things, and it makes everything easier.
Okay.
I want to add to what Andrea was saying there. One of the common complaints we get from sales organizations is, I haven't got time. All this is very nice and fluffy, but, you know, it's nice to have. Haven't got the time. We're in a hurry here. Deadlines, pressures, etc. It's one of the dumbest comments, you know, to be perfectly blunt, that you can make. It's about expense versus investment. If you are constantly chasing around the short term, saying, I've got to save 5 seconds here, I got to save 1 minute there, you end up never investing in the relationships, which in fact make everything go far more efficiently. You can see it in simple things like repeat business ratios. If you have a 70 or 80% repeat business ratio, you are spending way less time spinning your wheels than somebody who has to get a 50% renewal rate all the time. That's just a macro version of it, and it plays out on a micro level with all of our individual relationships. If we focus a little bit of attention on the other, things go so much more smoothly, and within a very short period of time, you actually are behaving more efficiently than all those people who think they're being efficient.
And I can see how that could play out as the sales rep says, I only get 15 minutes with my customer. You know, I need to get down to business here, but you'll get more time next time if you've built that trust relationship.
Often you'll get it that time. If you spend the first 10 out of 15, you know, talking about what's on their mind, you know, they'll often extend you right there. Let's keep going.
Yeah, exactly. So without having the perfect highest level of emotional intelligence, how does somebody work through a disagreement where you're adamant in your way, the customer or other person's adamant in their way? How do you work through that and maintain the trust?
It's a good question. Well, how about I start, Charlie, and you
Go
add?
ahead.
Um, so it's funny because, you know, it reminds me of, you know, lessons in my husband and I recently went to a couples workshop, a weekend, you know, focused on, we're newly married and we really want to get our relationship off to the best foot possible. And darn, if they didn't spend the entire weekend teaching us about listening skills and really getting in the other person's world. And, you know, when you have a major, like personal disagreement, that's the predominant thing to do. So I'm chuckling at your question because, you know, you think, wow, this is the business world, you know, it ought to be very different, you know, the rules are different, the engagement is different. And the reality is it really isn't. You know, if you've got two people, you're just positionally just completely at odds around an issue, I'd say the first place to start is get off your ass, you know, lower your self-orientation, up your curiosity, really, you know, find out how does the other person see it, and communicate to them that you get it. You know, well, here's what I'm seeing from your seat at the table. So in other words, you know, you see X, Y, and Z, and from your perspective, A, B, C are the most important things to accomplish. You know, do I have that right? Tell me more. Okay, now I see this part. Do I have that right? Tell me more. If you spend a little bit of time investing in that, then they're, by virtue of reciprocity, then likely to be interested and curious to do the same thing with you, understand your perspective. And if you're just rigorous about doing that, you know, 9 times out of 10, again, you know, high degree of probability, what's going to get unveiled is some kind of common ground or some, you know, place where you can connect around something. And if not, like worst case scenario, if there's just no room for that, then at least what you've done is built some goodwill. And you can hit the pause button and say, you know what, I think, you know, we need to come back to this, or I'd not like to think this over, you know, whatever it is. But then at least there's some kind of movement. And I think what happens is when there's disagreement and polarity, we just get stuck. We get stuck in our own mindset, our own point of view. We're right, they're wrong, you know, whatever it is. And we just have to be able to crack that open a little bit.
I think when you find yourself in that situation of, you know, we want this and they want that, the first thing to notice is that you're in that situation. And to be able to say out loud, holy cow, here we are stuck, us versus you. What's wrong with that picture? I mean, let's both notice that we're in this oppositional thing. That's crazy. Let's both get on the same side of the table and start refiguring back out the good relationship that we have. Well, you know, let's focus all the things we have in common and let's start talking about what our differences are and how we can put them back in a relationship context. If you're the one, and the salesperson needs to be the one to do this, to say, listen, if we're stuck against each other, we're crazy. We're doing something wrong. You know, I'll be the first one to raise my hand. We got something wrong here. Let's refigure it out. What do we have in common? You know, let's start with you, and so forth and so on, all the things that Andrea mentioned. One of the tips, by the way, one of the best ways to find common interest is to lengthen the time frame. Too much time is wasted focusing on a transaction. And so many of those situations, Mary, where you mentioned, you know, we want one thing and they want another, they're around a transaction. And the way around a transaction is never do a transaction. Only do one transaction out of 57.
Okay.
So you may say, well, this is the third iteration of what I hope will be 500, or this is the 27th. Why are we getting stuck on this? You know, we can make up something to you the next time. You can make something up to us the next time. We can expand the horizons over here. We can do this, that, or the other. It is crazy for us to get hung up over what is simply a bump in the road, a transaction in a much longer relationship.
Okay. Beautiful. So do any of these principles change as you're dealing with the C-suite?
There's one that comes to mind. I'll give Andrea a moment to ponder a few others, but one in particular, when you're selling to the C-suite, one of the things that's different is you are not necessarily supposed to always be selling. Sometimes you should say, you know what, you shouldn't even be buying this decision at all. You should do nothing. Because everybody below the C-suite, your job as a salesperson is to sell. If you want to be effective in the C-suite and stay there, you have to recognize that's the level where problems come to get sorted out as to whether they're worth solving or not. And if you're the one who can stop being push our solution and rather say, you know, let's think about what's right for you people. Maybe you need to pass on this one, or maybe this is a completely redefined issue. If you're not willing to put your own sale at risk, why should anybody trust you? And the truth is that sales in the C-suite are often not so obvious. You know, it isn't which CRM system do we buy, it's should we buy one at all? That's why it got kicked to that level. And once they sort that question out, you often can send it down a level. So I
Okay.
boil that down and say the biggest difference is be willing to scratch your head and take the perspective of the CXO that you're dealing with, and even say, you know what, you don't need this.
Perfect.
So one thing I would add to that is, and I think it applies universally, and it especially applies when you're selling to the C-suite, is to really check your motives. Because a lot of times we want to get into the C-suite for the wrong reasons. And it's not the reasons of what's best for the client or, you know, who really is the right person in the organization to sell to or engage in some kind of dialogue with. It's, oh, it's the C-suite. You know, there's something wrong if we're not engaging at that level. And I've literally heard dozens of C-level executives, you know, serving on panels, giving advice to people in professional services, saying, look, you're knocking down my door all the time. I'm really not the best person for you to talk to.
Right.
You know, I'm going to push these decisions down. If I'm doing my job as a C-level executive, I'm actually not the one that I'm not the door that you need to bang down. And you're additionally setting yourself up for trouble if there is somebody in there and you're kind of making it even appear like you're doing an end run around them to get to the C-suite. So being really rigorous about what are your motives and why are you trying to get in there and what is it of value that you can offer, you know, that executive. Being really clear about that before you even make an attempt, I think, is really important.
I like your answers together because it's such a good checklist for somebody, which is what you provide, that really the C-suite's job typically, I mean, there's certainly things that they are going to make the buying decisions on, but typically they're deciding whether to solve the problem or not. And if you have to knock on that door, your risk is you may convince them that it's more trivial than they thought and we're going to invest our budget somewhere else. So really, you know, work with the level that's appropriate to make the call on which supplier, but assume they've already decided to solve the problem. And if they haven't, maybe that's when you escalate. Is that fair?
I think so.
I think so. The one thing I'd add, Mary, is, you know, be careful. I think we all have to be careful of our concerns that if we do something, then the risk will be they'll see that it was trivial and therefore don't want to make the buying decision anyway. And if that's the case, I mean, if that's really what is best, then I don't think we should fear that.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the fundamental difference between kind of the mentality of traditional selling versus trust-based selling. In trust-based selling, you're trying to help the buyer make the best decision for him or her in that particular moment. In, you know, the way traditional sales has been approached, it's, you know, trying to convince them to buy from you.
Right.
And it's just, it sounds like simple word shifts, and yet it's a fundamental difference in orientation. And if the truth is that, you know, this particular purchase isn't the right thing right now, then I think as salespeople, we all owe it to ourselves and to our clients to make it our job to get that truth out as quickly as possible. And
by the way, nothing is more trustworthy than to say, I'm not the guy, or you don't need my product in this case.
It reminds
Immediately, you trust the person who says that.
Exactly. I was going to say, it reminds me of Santa Claus in Miracle on 34th Street.
Exactly.
When he refers
a lovely woman.
the May Santa who refers customer to Gimbals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, and mind you, I share that story a lot in the programs that I lead, and, you know, Santa got fired, right? So life for Santa wasn't so great in the short term, right? But in the long term.
Santa got fired by his immediate supervisor and rehired by the CEO.
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly. Because he was such a great trust builder, it drove up their business.
CEO knew what side his bread was buttered on. That's right.
Exactly. So Charlie and Andrea, if somebody wanted to dive into more of these principles or even get more tactical tools, is there somewhere they can go?
There is. So we've set up a special landing page for the Sales Mastery Summit. People can go to trustedadvisor.com/Sales Mastery Summit. And we've got a zip file, a packet of materials available, including a free download of the entire chapter 1 of the Trusted Advisor Fieldbook. We've got an ebook excerpt of Selling to the C-Suite, which builds on some of the conversation we've had today about that. We've got an ebook on the trust equation, which lists very specific and practical actions that people can take according to each of the 4 variables of the trust equation. An article on the paradox of selling, and brand new, before been released to any other audience, we've actually excerpted all of the worksheets from the 31 chapters in the Trusted Advisor Fieldbook into both a PDF and a Word form so that even without buying the book, you can get the benefit of using the worksheets and putting things into practice.
Excellent, excellent. Wow, what a gift. I love to ask, what excites you about transformations that you've helped clients accomplish when they really do pick up on the trust building skills and see what kind of results they can get? Do you have any favorite stories?
I have one top of mind for me because it's recent, and then but I hear variations of it all the time. I was working with a client last week. This happened to be the executive leading a group in a global accounting firm, and he was, right after we'd done a half-day program, he let me know the day later that he'd had a conversation with a client immediately following, and he said, and I put what we talked about to practice right away, which simply came in the form of he just practiced listening to the client instead of rushing so quickly to try to solve a problem or to mediate the conflict or the disagreement. He just kicked back and listened. And he said at the end of the conversation, the client convinced himself that the right answer was the one that my organization had suggested in the first place. And I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
Whatever the stakes are, whether there's a conflict or some kind of negotiation, or whether you're wishing for a sale, if you're just willing to just take a deep breath and relax and listen and get on the other person's agenda and really seek to understand their point of view, so I get excited when little things like that just make such a big difference. Like it just, blows open an entire relationship and a way of being in a relationship.
Yeah. I think both Andrew and I treasure these sort of transformative aha epiphany type moments, and there's a bunch of them, which I'll just pick one. There's a woman who took on a new major project management job for a systems consulting organization. And as she took it over, it was for a federal agency contract, I think. As she took it over, she realized that an upcoming deadline was in danger and honestly not going to be met. And there was all kinds of pressure from her higher ups and to the client to sign off on the upcoming status report to say everything was going to go along as scheduled and proper. And she kind of, the night before, she could hardly sleep and decided she was just going to have to say it wasn't going to go, and she would probably be fired for having said it. So she went in, and they, in some big official building with all kinds of big tables and so forth, and the government main client asked what he thought was a fairly pro forma question: how are we doing on status? And she said, I don't think we're going to make the deadline. Gasp in the room, and she left that night thinking that was it. Well, the next day she was informed she got promoted for having been so honest and direct, and finally they could believe somebody, and everything ended up happy. We find that over and over and over. There's a sort of paradoxical quality to trust. Like, the most trustworthy thing you can say is, I don't know how to do that. Who's going to doubt you on that one? We find those components over and over. Lots of neat stories like that.
I love that both of your examples really highlight that trust equation. So, if you stay self-oriented in terms of my job's on the line, that's driving up the wrong part of your equation, let go and do what's in the best interest of the project or the client. Perfect.
Right.
So as people are diving in and learning these skills, where do they get stuck or tripped up?
I'll start on that one. They always get tripped up in the same place. It's fear. They suddenly get transfixed with fear. Oh my God. And you can run down the list of 1,001 fears. I'll just mention a few. Anybody listening to this can fill them in. I'm afraid they're going to find out that I don't know. I'm afraid I might be wrong. I'm afraid I'll look stupid. I'm afraid I'll look young and inexperienced. I'm afraid they won't think well of me. I'm afraid it's not going to work. I'm afraid this is inappropriate. I'm being socially wrong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore, what do? Nothing. And nothing is the enemy of trust. If you just sit there like a lump, like a bump on a log, doing nothing, nothing will happen. In fact, it'll generally atrophy and just get worse. So what we have to do is sort of learn to remember when we're in these high stress moments. Oh my God, here's another of those learning opportunity moments. I guess I better speak some truth, be honest, be transparent, put the truth out there, and trust that this stuff actually kind of works. And of course, it usually does.
Love it. Andrea, do you have any?
Yeah, I have another one to add. I mean, underscore, bold, italicize everything Charlie just said. And I think another place that we all get tripped up, and I use the universal we because, we're human. It happens to the best of us. is that we don't cultivate trustworthiness as a habit the same way we do other things. You know, we will habitually check our email. We will habitually call our prospect list. We will habitually read industry blogs. And yet we don't habitually build our trust muscles the same way we do other things. And I think that's a key gap for all of us to close and look at how can we, on an ongoing basis, keep it top of mind and develop the same level of habit and mastery around trust building that we do around other things that we, eminently value.
Well, I love it. That's our goal with the Sales Mastery Summit, is to build skills that someone can master. Do you have any last final advice for our viewers as they embark on their own pursuit of building trustworthiness?
Well, I mean, the tenor of a lot of what you're asking and what I think people are looking for are, behavioral things that I can take away and do tomorrow. And I'm always a little hesitant to give those because a lot of good comes, the actions come out of a good mindset. But that said, let me mention two. One of them, a little more mindset oriented, just be curious. Focus on cultivating an attitude of being curious, because that means you'll be other oriented and you will say and do the right things. And if you want a really behavioral mechanical thing that you can do starting in 10 minutes, the next person you have an interaction with, make an observation, a guess about how you think they might be feeling. And it's as simple as saying, you look a little fill in the blank. You look happy. You look a little concerned. You look a little upset. Just make the observation, based on what you see. If you can learn to do that, you get over an awful lot of fear. It's totally other-oriented. You will surprise people and generally delight them. And you'll get over the fear of commenting on other people's feelings.
Love it. Andrea, any last words from you?
Yes, so my piece of advice, and this is especially for salespeople, is to stop selling. And as crazy as that sounds, it is stop selling and start helping. Yep. So look at that prospect list, look at the sales pipeline, and go down systematically and say, how can I help this person? How can I help that person? What can I do to be useful? And allow the answers to be completely expansive. It could be, get their newly graduated high school senior an internship next year. Because a trusted advisor fundamentally is a safe haven for tough issues, not a safe haven for tough issues for which, you have a product or service. And I think having a helping mindset and having that long-term orientation and being willing to help however you can right now, whatever it has to do with, I think that's key advice, whatever it has to do with, I think that's key advice for anybody in sales.
Perfect. Well, thank you both for helping us really learn how we can become trusted advisors ourselves. I'm sure for any of our viewers that were really schooled on avoiding conflict at all costs and really challenged when they need to overcome issues with customers, this has been a real gift for them.
Great. Thank you, Mary. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in and investing in your own success. The Sales Mastery Summit is here to help you never stop learning from the best. Take care.